two of the early actors of the BLE story. Ian Craig, CEO of Core Transport Technologies, and John Van Gessel, Adair, New Zealand. And before we go any further, I think it's worth remarking that John recently achieved the notable target of 50 years working for Air New Zealand. Quite a milestone.
Yep, well done.
Yes, well done indeed. Jordi Care has been watching the development of BLE with great interest since we first heard about it a little over 2 years ago. It seems to us that this technology can offer a real opportunity for change in the management of ULD. So during the course of the next few minutes, I'd like to hear about how this initiative got going in the first place, what has transpired since then, and what benefits have been delivered, and then wrap up with some thoughts as to where BLE may go in the future. So without further ado, could I ask Ian to tell us a little bit how he started on the BLE journey? Ian, the floor is yours.
Actually, yes, a lot of it came from our experience with USPS, which was our biggest customer for 10 years. And they were interested in ways to have hands-off reporting of deliveries, electronic reporting of deliveries, which is traditionally all done with handheld scanners. And so they were concerned about the cost of scanning, and the airlines were concerned about that. And then, given the width of the USPS network worldwide, and sure, some places are high volume, but others are lower volume, everybody was looking for something that was touch-free and at a reasonable cost. And so we started experimenting with Bluetooth because the industry experience with RFID was that it was incredibly expensive and not a lot of wide coverage. So we were also concerned about coverage issues at a reasonable price, network coverage. So BLE popped up as a kind of natural for that because unlike RFID at short range, BLE could achieve 100 meters, and therefore you could, with not a lot of equipment, determine what was in a particular location. So the first place we did something like that was Chicago and the Postal Service, and this Chicago sort center, and they had 64 bays, which we covered with, I think it was 3 or 4 readers, which would have needed 64 readers minimum, probably 128 if you were doing RFID. So the cost difference was just staggering. And of course, Bluetooth has since then been widely adopted for commercial and personal use, and it's become a prevalent, sort of ubiquitous technology. So I think it was the right call, but its objectives were to actually be hands-free and reduce all the manual labor, and even it wasn't just manual labor with scanners, it was manual labor with paperwork. So that's how it originated.
And how did you then get involved in the sometimes obscure world of ULD? It's not an obvious headline subject. There must be some magic in how you transition from USPS to ULD.
Yes, because USPS was interested in not quite package level tracking, but what they call receptacles and mail. But then we thought the technology is not ready for that volume, and therefore how could we effectively track? And we started to think about ULDs as, well, they're a trackable item, and then you can track by association what's on those, on or in those ULDs. And so we then started working with people like John over, because most of their mail was containerized. It seemed a logical step to go there and start seeing if we could replace the mail scanning systems with ULDs tracked and associate the mail with the ULD. And I think our mail system is quite effective at that, and it has a very visual way of associating receptacles with ULDs. So we transitioned really from mail to cargo through our relationship with people like Air New Zealand and eventually Delta. And now that would be our primary focus, and we would see mail as just one sort of class of freight.
Thank you. Well, that's an interesting story of how you got into it. So, John, if I could ask you, how did Air New Zealand start on this journey?
Well, right really from the beginning, because the mail might have been loaded in Chicago, but to do the testing, the mail was sent down because we carried US Post mail out of Chicago, out of Los Angeles, into Auckland, onto Wellington, onto Christchurch. And so readers were set up in all those locations. And I can tell you the tags in those days looked like large M&M type buttons. And they originally testing, the idea was you put a tag in each mailbag, but you didn't really have to put the tag in the mailbag. You could just put a dozen tags in a unit, and you then tried to see, could the readers read all the units? So it was very logically, you were using the tags that were inside a unit to see how many tags can you count. And I think you could see the story already began. What's the point of having a tag in every parcel? Why don't you have a tag on the unit and associate the parcels that are in that unit with the tag, and the readers read them? So it was quite quick transition when you started saying, hang on, this has got potential beyond just mailbags. And certainly we did quite a bit of testing with Core, doing with mailbags, and then we would put the larger tags when they had a few more features and benefits in consolidated shipments. And we did some shipments, for example, from Japan, from a freight forwarder in Japan through to Los Angeles. And it would come from Japan down to New Zealand to Los Angeles, and the customer could actually start seeing the information on a live feed. And that really excited them. So you can see how the transition was already starting very early in the development. And probably the most exciting bit is that these tags just don't stop being what they did. They then became something else, and the readers became a lot more. They could calibrate things. They could, you could tell where your containers are, and a whole bunch of other features that would come through. So probably that's more back in the technology development that Ian's so good to develop for us.
That's an interesting story, and I think it's true to say, isn't it, that it might never have happened if it hadn't been for the fact that you in Air New Zealand hold the portfolios of mail and ULD, and you joined the dots. If the two functions had been held by separate people, you might never have made that connection.
Well, I'm sure other people who are smarter than me would quickly have seen it, because what it's evolved to, it's almost, because these days the tag is now connected to the international cargo airway bills, or even the domestic consignment notes. You connect those to the units, and then the customers are starting to be able to, on a live time, see what's happening to their shipments. And I tell you what, that's a very strong sales point when you're dealing with customers.
I think also both Air New Zealand and Delta have moved to putting readers into their customers. So that the customer everybody can say definitively that that piece of freight has actually arrived at the customer's door. So that's been an increasing trend over the last few months, and broadening the network. And then, of course, they're going into GHAs, and so the whole end-to-end process is becoming traceable, which actually gives airlines an edge against the integrators that they couldn't possibly consider in the past, just because of the cost of scanning as opposed to Bluetooth detection. So, yeah, it's moving along quite quickly.
Yes, well, that which kind of brings me into the next question, really, which is, well, first of all, to Ian, what have you found to be the biggest obstacles in getting this from its early days up to today, when, as you say, it's become quite widely used by at least a number of carriers? What have been the biggest challenges? Are they technical? Are they business related, business process related?
I think there have definitely been some technical challenges. I'd be the last to deny that. So at the physical level, things like pallet tags, I've gone through several iterations of design just to avoid the brutal treatment of pallets, as an example. But that's actually resulted in some new designs that are quite effective for that environment. So you got that kind of physical level, then you get at the network level. Cellular communication is not as reliable as perhaps we planned on, which has led to what we call mesh networks, where they're resilient and a mesh network will go and find a path to a cellular reader that's actually active. So there's a lot of that. Then you've got coverage areas where there's no power, and so that's been answered with mesh networks and solar relays. And then you've got people who actually unplug readers, which is kind of frustrating, but because they've got battery backup in them, we can at least tell that they were unplugged. But I think that's just another symptom of needing a highly resilient network, which everything we're releasing at the moment is aimed at that level of resilience and covering areas where there's no power, which I think in airports is a big deal. And one of the things we found with the virus issue is that stuff is not moving as quickly. So people park it outside, particularly pallets. They stick them in a stack and stick them out of reader range. And then people go, well, why can't I read those pallets? But the answer to that is they're put in areas where there's no power. But we're working with Delta, and we're already doing this at Air New Zealand, but we're working with Delta to increase the coverage by using cheaper solar relays to cover areas outside a facility. But our mental set at the start was we were just trying to see what's inside a facility. But the requirement is broadening out, but so is the technology. So with the mesh relay, you could measure at 2 kilometers. So we could know over a huge area, but we can also tell roughly where the unit is relative to nodes in the mesh. So I don't want to get too technical, but that's kind of what occupies our minds at the moment, right?
Wow. John, what's been, for Air New Zealand, what have been the high points and the low points of taking the BLE and putting it into real life?
I think let's start with the high point, and I would say that on our domestic network within New Zealand, we have many A320 aircraft, and so the BLE tag we were quite quickly able to get tags on all the AKH units and the PKC equipment, and we effectively replaced our current operating system reporting of ULDs, which was done through UCMs, to the live tracking. and you then roll it out. So you have people on the ground, the baggage loaders, if they're short of an AKH, they can go into it's through a Power BI app, just where are the units? I need some more units, go to there. And so we're totally relying on the tracking system to report where the units are for collection versus the historic system, which does run in parallel, that's based on UCMs, and UCMs are really only as good as the people who input the data, and we have good and bad operators on that. So it's interesting to see how the transition happened to the point where especially around where there's a good density of readers, people don't rely on the old system, they just use that. So that's a very high point. And I guess the low point is the rate it takes to implement change. And, I'm delighted to say that with the support of Delta, who've really started to connect their readers with their customers, because remember, it's not every time Delta ask for a reader to be put in the customer, it's not just Delta who benefits, it's all the users of the system. Wow. So all of a sudden, we've got many thousands of places that our units are able to be seen. And quite recently, we had the funny incident of someone borrowed our unit in Chicago, and it was a reading in Baku. Now, we'll never ever fly to Baku, but we were able to get the AKEs back. But the frustrating is the length of time it's taking to transition from connecting the BLE tags to the airway bills on the cargo manifest. So that's a journey that we still have to complete. And of course, you need financial resources and implementation project to get that. And I guess I look at that with frustration, because I think what a win it would be if we had it today, but it's not going to happen in the very near future, given the way the world is at the moment. No one's hiring extra staff to implement a process like that just yet.
No, that's true. So now looking ahead a little bit, I mean, John, in a way, you've touched on this, that you would love to see a completely seamless integration between the information coming off the BLE tag and the airway bill. And I agree with you. As an online buyer, I very much like the ability to go in there and track to see where my purchase from Amazon or whoever, where it is. So I think
where it really is.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I think the BLE can actually take it further forward, because at the moment that process still relies on scanning and RFID. Ian, what do you see coming forward in the next couple of years as far as the development, both in the BLE itself, which I understand is quite rapidly developing anyway, but also in this particular application? What can we look forward to?
I think one of the big challenges with BLE tracking is the perception that BLE it sort of sits in the middle. It's neither short range nor long range. And then you've got other things like NB-IoT and sort of network technologies that people are promoting as having very long range. But the challenge has always been to have the best of both, right? Because you still want to know to within, say, around an aircraft, we're only maybe talking 50 meters, and you want to know what's around that aircraft, coming off, going on, etc. So having a long range technology that can see for 50 kilometers isn't actually that helpful. It doesn't tell you much to know that your container's somewhere within 50 kilometers. But the way things are emerging, and we were quite pleased to find that there's a new thing called BLE 551, which is very complex, and it relies on multiple aerials, but it could get down to a meter. And it just happens every device we've produced has got multiple modules and aerials, which is what you need. So it's a software implementation for us, but what I'm hoping we get to is the best of both worlds. We could see your ULD at the, well, John's one's at the top of the north of Hong Kong airport and transiting down the road, but we can say it actually went into that cooler station right there, which is only, you know, several meters wide. So I think that is very close, and then you can get down to merging warehouse type activities with our more broader tracking of ULDs and saying that they're on the airport. So that's what we're working on. The other one I'd say is interoperability. We are working with people to be able to read third-party tags, and we're looking at even our tags being read by other networks. We still obviously think it makes sense to really heavily invest in the network and its coverage, but at the same time, being more flexible about whether other people's specialized tags can be read on our broader network is something that we're working hard on. So I'd say interoperability, short range, long range, those would be key issues in terms of broadening the business you can get out of the network.
And just remember that these tags already can report on temperature, they can report on direction, they report on, is it pressure or something like that as well?
They do.
Some things that we don't, it's not immediate use to us, but it's so many other features that the technology is delivering.
Well, I think that's a good point, because if you recall, we started at the bottom of saying, let's try and track all the ULDs, whereas a lot of people have come from the top saying, I only want to do medical supplies and cool chain and all this, and with very expensive tags. But we're about to, well, the current release of the tags does very precise temperature, humidity, and accelerometer, three directional accelerometers, but they're all in the same, pretty much the same price bracket and the same technological package as what we put out just to track a ULD. So I think that will shake up the cool chain market, because the dynamics will change based on a broad network and reasonably affordable tags.
Wow, interesting journey we're on here. And I mean, I think in the interest of time, we probably should wrap this up, although we could probably also talk about it for another hour. But yes, from the ULD Care perspective, we're always looking for anything that can in some form or other enhance the ULD experience. We all know it's an activity that is awash with challenges, the losses, the damage, the losses which are both temporary and permanent. It's not an industry that is noted for its efficiency. So it's very, very exciting to see these new technologies actually not just being talked about, but being implemented. Yes, thank you very much, gentlemen, both of you. It's very, very exciting to have this opportunity. And yes, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.